All right, now that you know how to set your resolution and frame rate, let's talk about what really controls the look of your footage. Exposure. In photography and video, exposure means how bright or how dark your image is, and is controlled by three settings: shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Together, they're called the exposure triangle, and getting a good image means balancing all three. Imagine exposure like filling up a bucket of light. Each setting, shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, lets in more or less light in its own way. Shutter speed equals how long your camera sees the light for. Aperture is how wide the lens opens. ISO is how sensitive your sensor is to light. So let's break down each one of these individually, and then we're going to put them all together. So shutter speed is how long your camera's sensor is exposed to light for each frame. In video, it also affects how motion looks. A fast shutter speed, like 1/1000th of a second, gives you really crisp motion, less blur. A slow shutter speed, something like 1/30th of a second, it gives you a lot of really good motion blur and more light. For cinematic video, we follow something called the 180-degree shutter rule, which sounds really confusing, but it's actually really simple. The 180-degree rule basically means your shutter speed is always going to be double your frame rate. So if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, you want to use 1/48th of a second. Or most times you're going to use 1/50th of a second, because most cameras will round to the nearest number, and that's close enough. If you're shooting at 60 frames per second, you'll double that to 1/120th of a second. Using this formula gives you just the right amount of motion blur to feel natural and cinematic. If your shutter's too fast, your footage feels real jittery. If you make it too slow, everything looks really mushy. Next is aperture. This controls how wide your lens opens to let in light, and also how much is in focus in your shot. A low number like f1.8 equals more light, and it gives you a really shallow depth of field, which means you'll have a really blurry background. A higher number like f11 brings in less light and more things are in focus. A wide aperture creates that beautiful blurry background that you see in cinematic shots. That's called a shallow depth of field. I often use Nikon's S-line lenses on my Z8, like a 35mm or an 85mm, because they let me shoot at really low f-stops to get gorgeous depth. A more expensive lens will allow you a lower f-stop. Now don't stress if your lens doesn't go super low. You can still create amazing images with an f4 or even an f5.6, especially with great lighting and composition. The last piece of the triangle is ISO. ISO is your camera's sensitivity to light. So a higher ISO, or ISO, makes the image brighter, but it also adds grain and noise, which is usually a bad thing. A low ISO, like 100 or 400, it gives you a really clean image and a lot less noise. A high ISO, like 1600, will make your image a lot brighter, but it adds a lot more grain and digital noise. Now on the Nikon Z8, for example, I can handle a really high ISO, which is one of the reasons that I use it. But even so, no matter what, I'll always shoot with the lowest possible ISO, and then I'll adjust the other two settings instead. So how do you actually balance all of this? Here's one quick cheat sheet. If you want cinematic motion blur, set your shutter speed to double your frame rate. If you want background blur, use a super low aperture, like f2.8 or even lower. If you're shooting in low light, you're really gonna need to raise your ISO, but only as much as needed. And remember, the look of your footage changes depending on which one of these you prioritize. Do you want it sharp, soft, bright, dramatic? There's no perfect setting, and that's the beauty of it. You do what tells your story the best. So here's another pro tip. If your image is too bright outside and your aperture is wide open, you can try using what's called an ND filter, a neutral density filter. It's like sunglasses for your lens. It might seem like a lot at first, but once you practice this triangle a few times, it becomes second nature. Next, we're gonna break down lenses and focal lengths so you can learn how to frame up your shots for maximum impact. If this helped you even a little, hit subscribe. I've got a full playlist walking you through every step of becoming a confident filmmaker, and if you want my free downloadable gear guide, the link is right below.